Question period. I recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
This tired and out-of-touch government has failed to deliver the cost of living relief that Saskatchewan people need. Under this Premier's watch, Mr. Speaker, Saskatchewan has the worst job creation record in the country, and we lead the nation when it comes to mortgages in arrears. Now, Mr. Speaker, if the Premier was listening, he wouldn't need me to tell him that Saskatchewan people need some relief. Why hasn't the Premier scrapped the fuel tax to give Saskatchewan people the relief that they so need?
Recognize the Premier.
With respect to affordability, we've stood on the floor of this legislature many times, Mr. Speaker, and discussed the over $2 billion in affordability measures that are in place. Mr. Speaker, many of them incontested to ensure that we are achieving results like taking 112,000 people off the tax rolls, the provincial tax rolls altogether, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the residents are paying less tax, Mr. Speaker, than they were 10 and 15 years ago in this province, in particular all of those that may be in the lower income brackets in the province of Saskatchewan, Mr. Speaker. When it comes to job creation in this province, Mr. Speaker, in 2020, following an unprecedented pandemic, Mr. Speaker, there was job creation in this province. The job numbers increased by about 50,000 that particular year, Mr. Speaker. The year following 2021, another 15,300 more jobs were created in the province. 10,900 the year after that, in his most recent year, Mr. Speaker, just under 20,000 jobs, Mr. Speaker, which is leading this province to having some of the fastest population growth in the nation of Canada, the third lowest unemployment rate, and the second highest number of jobs per capita of any province or territory in the nation.
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I'll address something that was said earlier by the member from Estevan, and it was this. She knows very well, the Premier knows very well, that this side, we do not support the carbon tax. But I'm also old enough to remember, Mr. Speaker, when the Premier voted for our motion calling on the federal government to scrap their unfair treatment on home heating oil. Now, Mr. Speaker, remitting an unfair and uneven tax isn't right. But neither, Mr. Speaker, is sitting on your hands and failing to get a deal. Mr. Speaker, we say this because on Friday, we learned that neither the Sask Energy Minister nor the Premier even bothered to pick up a phone to try to get a deal from the feds. Mr. Speaker, that is not leadership. Why didn't the Premier even bother to pick up the phone and actually do his homework, get a deal that benefits the people in this province?
Recognize the Premier.
Have happened with the federal government. Most recently, I had a conversation with Minister Guilbeault when we were at the COP28 climate conference in Dubai, Mr. Speaker. Those conversations have happened between multiple ministers and the federal government. And what we see time and time again, Mr. Speaker, from this federal coalition, Liberal NDP government, all too often is the policy decisions that are not treating Canadians fairly. Mr. Speaker, what we saw most recently, and credit to the NDP to finally see the light, Mr. Speaker, we saw a decision that was going to favour one area of the nation and Canadians in one area of the nation over other areas. What this minister has done, Mr. Speaker, is rectified that. It's about carbon tax fairness, if there is such a thing, Mr. Speaker, and it is still the policy position of this government, Mr. Speaker, that tax, that silly and ridiculous, harmful, Mr. Speaker, inflationary carbon tax should be removed on everything for everyone, Mr. Speaker, and if the entire opposition has changed their position across the board on that, they should inform a couple of the members whose comments I'll read into the record shortly.
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we have consensus on this side, but there's also consensus in this province that this tired and out-of-touch government gave up a long time ago in working for the interests of Saskatchewan people. This is a Premier who is clearly more interested in picking fights than actually delivering for Saskatchewan people. Now, Mr. Speaker, he has time to fly fly to India, time to fly to Dubai, but he can't pick up the phone and get a deal for Saskatchewan people. Mr. Speaker, he didn't even try. Why can't the Premier do his job, pick up the phone, and get that fair deal that Saskatchewan people deserve?
Recognize the Premier.
Speaker, I'm pretty sure I answered that in the last question, where multiple ministers have talked to the federal government about, and have been talking for a number of years with respect to the harmful inflationary impacts of this ridiculous carbon tax, Mr. Speaker, which is not lowering emissions in any way. It's driving up the cost of our fuel every time we go to the service station, Mr. Speaker. It's driving up the cost of our groceries each and every time we go to the grocery store, Mr. Speaker, of which members on that side think is okay. Is it the member, Mr. Speaker, one of them, I can't remember which one, would also say, why shouldn't consumers actually pay the price of carbon for producing food? Mr. Speaker, he went on to say that we don't think that the carbon tax is a tax. It's a necessary price on pollution. Right. Mr. Speaker, and spoiler alert, he was in favour. Right.
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, it's clear that this government has given up on trying to offer any cost of living relief for the people of this province. They could scrap the fuel tax today, but they choose not to. And they're also, Mr. Speaker, failing when it comes to our kids' classrooms. We're joined today, Mr. Speaker, by thousands of teachers from across this province, and they're here fighting for education, fighting for our kids. Mr. Speaker, why are they here in the galleries instead of in the classrooms that they love? Because this government has refused to bargain in good faith and negotiate a deal that includes class size and complexity. Right. Now, why won't that Premier bargain in good faith with the teachers who have come here to their legislature?
Recognize the Premier.
First and foremost, Mr. Speaker, let me say thank you to all of the teachers across the province that have been out advocating on behalf of their profession, Mr. Speaker, advocating on behalf of the sports in their classroom, Mr. Speaker. They've been at my office in Shelbrook a number of weeks ago, Mr. Speaker, down here in Regina today. I know they've been at the Minister of Education's office, as well as a number of other MLAs in here, Mr. Speaker, and most certainly that advocacy on behalf of their profession and the students in the classrooms, I think, is admirable, Mr. Speaker. The fact of the matter is it is a goal and the intent of this government to ensure that our students and our teachers remain in the classroom, Mr. Speaker, and we would ask that the Teachers Union return to the bargaining table. That is the way for them to ensure that we are continuing to have our teachers in the classroom, Mr. Speaker. What you have seen, Mr. Speaker, is a teachers union that has chosen to go to the bargaining table for 30 minutes in the last 5 months. That is not proper representation of the teachers across this province, Mr. Speaker, and most certainly I think parents in this province, parents of children in their classrooms, expect more. Mr. Speaker, the government is continuing to move to find points of collaboration and points that we can agree on, whether it be in the wages, Mr. Speaker, that are offered, whether it be on a number of other topics. There are points where we may not find that collaboration, Mr. Speaker, but in order for our teachers and our students to remain in the classroom, Mr. Speaker, we do need the Teachers Union to return to the bargaining table.
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the Premier takes great pains to put some sort of distinction between the Teachers Union and the teachers who are here today. Let me tell you what, they have a 95% mandate to be here, Mr. Speaker, and that's more of a mandate that he has. But, Mr. Speaker, this arrogance and entitlement is what people have come to expect when it comes to this government. Mr. Speaker, they're not here because they want platitudes or good words, Mr. Speaker. They're here because they want a deal, and they need this government to get back to the table and negotiate a deal that deals with class size and complexity. Mr. Speaker, and I'll say this clearly, if that government is not interested in doing that, then I'll tell you, an NDP government will. Hear, hear. Mr. Speaker, this is a government that doesn't want to do the work. They don't want to pick up the phone, and they don't want to work for the people of Saskatchewan. They're more interested in picking fights than they are actually delivering results. When will the Premier finally find his feet to act, to do his job, to do what's right and get a fair deal for teachers and for our kids in this province.
Recognize the Premier.
Let me reiterate, the fastest way and the most sure way for teachers to remain and our students to remain in the classroom is for the teachers' union to return to the bargaining table.
Right.
Mr. Speaker, they've been at the bargaining table for 30 minutes in the last 5 months, Mr. Speaker. Saskatchewan parents, and I would say teachers, expect better representation than that. Mr. Speaker, there are points where we will find collaboration at that bargaining table and points of agreement, and we need the teachers' union to return to that table in order to do so. There are points where we may not, Mr. Speaker. In a jurisdiction where, by StatsCan's numbers, Saskatchewan individuals, families invest more in education than any other province in the nation, Mr. Speaker, we are not going to be able to meet a 23.5% wage increase. However, Mr. Speaker, what we have done is try to put multiple offers on the table for the teachers to consider, Mr. Speaker. And when it comes to classroom size and complexity, and I would point to the next couple of days on the government's continued commitment in this space. Since the last budget, Mr. Speaker, there's been $53.5 million provided in this space. That's a testament to the government's commitment that we need to continue to work with school divisions and teachers in funding classroom size and complexity. Mr. Speaker, there's additional commitments to come in the next number of days. However, those dollars are also going to flow through our locally elected school divisions, Mr. Speaker, but always happy to work with teachers to ensure that we are providing the best learning environment for our children. And last, Mr. Speaker, I would just end how I started, Mr. Speaker. We do want teachers and students to remain in the classroom, and the quickest way for that to happen is for the teachers' union to return to and remain at the bargaining table.
Recognize the member from Saskatchewan Eastview.
Mr. Speaker, what a shame to see the Premier stand in here and show the same disrespect to teachers in here that he's been showing to them on billboards across the province the last year. And then he's got the gall to talk about local board autonomy when his government has been running down and attacking local board autonomy for more than a decade. After 10 years of underfunding from this tired and out-of-touch government, the only autonomy that local boards have left is the autonomy to make cuts every time they get an insufficient budget from this Premier's government. That's the only autonomy that they've got left. Teachers here today, they love what they do. But the pressures and underfunding in our classrooms can't go on like this. Enough is enough. It's time for a deal that addresses class size and complexity. When will this minister finally show teachers some respect and negotiate a fair deal on class size and complexity?
Recognize the Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as the Premier has indicated, government believes that students and teachers belong in the classroom and that union leadership belongs at the bargaining table, Mr. Speaker. 30 minutes in 5 months is not going to get the deal done, Mr. Speaker. This is a government that wants to get a deal done. We've made movement on several of the STF leadership's demands, Mr. Speaker. Annualization of class size and complexity funding, we've offered that. Managing their own dental plan, we've offered that, Mr. Speaker. Annualization of 2 pilot projects, Mr. Speaker, we've offered that. And the same salary deal, Mr. Speaker, that MLAs get, that STF asked for that, we've offered that, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's time for the union leadership to get back to the bargaining table so that teachers and students can be back in the classroom.
Recognize the member from Saskatoon Eastview.
Mr. Speaker, I'm glad that the minister is in the correct city to talk about education today, because the teachers are here too. In fact, there are thousands of teachers at their legislature today who are watching, and even more teachers across this province watching and focusing on his words from home. And they're going to remember this day. They're going to remember this day is the day that the Saskatchewan NDP committed to bargaining on class size and composition at the table with teachers. And that this is also the day that this tired and out-of-touch government doubled down and said no. Mr. Speaker, why won't the Sask Party listen to the teachers of Saskatchewan and say yes to a fair deal that includes class size and complexity, or will that minister stand up and again say no?
Recognize the Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we've been very clear so far. We're very clear today The best way to get a deal done, Mr. Speaker, and to ensure that students and teachers are back in the classroom is for the union leadership to come back to the bargaining table and stay there and get a deal done, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we're not going to be negotiating class size and complexity in a provincially bargained agreement or here on the floor of the House, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we're not going to take the responsibility of locally elected school boards and hand that over to a provincial union, Mr. Speaker. That's not something that this government's prepared to do. Again, we want to get a deal done, Mr. Speaker. For that to happen, we need the union leadership back at the bargaining table.
Recognize a member from Saskatchewan Eastview.
Sure, you won't negotiate here in the Assembly, but you'll negotiate through billboards and Twitter every day of the week. Mr. Speaker, this minister talks about respecting boards of education. Well, here's what the board of Regina Catholic Schools said in a letter just 3 days ago. Quote, "We have continued to speak with the minister and his office over the past few weeks to request that they address class size and complexity by showing up for education in the provincial budget." Another quote, "We desperately require this increase and have spoken about the need to address class size and complexity." Mr. Speaker, everyone in education agrees class size and complexity need to be addressed. Why won't this minister get a deal so that teachers and boards can fix this problem today?
Hear, hear. Recognize the Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, talking about speaking with boards of education, I've met with 26 of the 27 school boards over the last several months, meeting with that last 27th here in the next week or two, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I'll tell you one thing that boards of education across the province are united on. They are united on the fact that issues around class size and composition are a local board right. Decisions to be made by locally elected school board members, Mr. Speaker. I've been engaging with school boards all across the province, Mr. Speaker, from Regina to Saskatoon, Creighton, Lloydminster, North Battleford, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we're having some great discussions on investing into education further. Mr. Speaker, just this school year, we've invested over $300 million into classroom supports, Mr. Speaker, and added that to that in year with various pilot projects and additional complexity funding, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we've got a provincial budget in a couple of weeks, and we look forward to making another record investment in the education of this province.
Recognize a member from Regina Walsh Acres.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Those 27 boards are united in their belief that this government isn't up to the task of fixing the problem in education. Now, this tired and out-of-touch government is failing teachers, but they're failing to deliver on health care as well. Under this Premier's watch, rural Saskatchewan has lost 21% of its registered nurses. That's 1 in 5. 474 registered nurses gone. The largest drop in all of the provinces in this study. Does the Minister of Health think this exodus of registered nurses under his watch is acceptable?
Recognize the Minister of Rural and Remote Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And of course, the data that the member opposite is citing is from CIHI. And CIHI, as has been explained in this House a number of times before, relies on voluntary survey data, Mr. Speaker. We, on this side of the House, rely on the actual data, the actual numbers, which, of course, Mr. Speaker, since our government took power in 2007, Mr. Speaker, we've added over 5,000 nurses and over 1,000 more licensed physicians to this province, Mr. Speaker. That's a 40% increase in nurses, Mr. Speaker, and a 62% increase in physicians over what the NDP offered when they were in power in this government, Mr. Speaker. We're continuing to address and stabilize the rural and remote healthcare situation, Mr. Speaker. We know there's more work to be done, but we have a health human resources action plan that is targeted and addressing those issues. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the member from Regina Walsh Acres.
Mr. Speaker, we are losing our rural healthcare workforce at the highest rate in the country. The numbers don't just show cuts to nurses, they show that we're going in the wrong direction on doctors, too. Those same numbers show Saskatchewan lost 35 doctors of all types to other provinces in 2022, the second highest loss amongst the provinces. And in rural areas, since this Premier came to office, Sun Country lost 25% of their specialists. Cypress Health lost 11% of their specialists. Prairie North Health lost 29% of their specialists. When will the Sask Party stop taking rural Saskatchewan for granted and start making sure people can access health care close to home?
Recognize the Minister of Rural and Remote Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And obviously, our government is not taking rural health care for granted. We're building hospitals. We're building health care facilities. The opposite members closed those facilities when they had the opportunity, Mr. Speaker. In terms of numbers, Mr. Speaker, our government is proud of the recruitment efforts that we have been making recently with their Health Human Resources Action Plan. 964 nursing graduates have been hired since December of 2022 alone, Mr. Speaker. More than 550 seats have been added in 18 post-secondary programs in our institutions, Mr. Speaker, so that students can fill these seats and will soon be employed in our healthcare system in this province, Mr. Speaker. We've added seats to the College of Medicine. We've added seats to the Saskatchewan Indian Institute of Technologies for the healthcare aid program. Mr. Speaker, we have 298 hard-to-recruit positions that have been filled as a direct result of our rural and remote recruitment incentive that we have offered so that we can continue to address and stabilize the healthcare challenges in rural Saskatchewan. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the member from the General Shakers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Sask Party likes to spin the numbers, but the real numbers are in, and the staffing crisis in healthcare is nothing new. This tired and out-of-touch government doesn't have to take my word for it. They can listen to the folks at the Saskatchewan Association of Rural Municipalities. Last week, one day after we highlighted the numbers showing how bad healthcare staffing is in rural Saskatchewan, SARM announced their support for a grow-your-own plan to train and hire more healthcare workers, something that we've been calling for months. If the Sask Party won't listen to us, Mr. Speaker, will they at least listen to SARM and finally develop a grow-your-own plan to fix our health care?
Recognize the Minister of Rural and Remote Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Health and I met with SARM this morning, and we meet with them quite regularly on a quarterly basis and as required. And, Mr. Speaker, we'll be meeting with them again next week when they have their SARM convention. Improving access to primary health care in rural communities is a priority for our government, Mr. Speaker. The member opposite speaks about nurse practitioners. There are a significant number of opportunities for nurse practitioners in rural Saskatchewan. We have dozens of positions posted and available for nurse practitioners in our rural communities, Mr. Speaker. We also have a number of incentives available, available for those positions. Nurse practitioner relocation grants offer nurse practitioners to relocate to communities under 10,000 people, up to $40,000 incentive for 5-year return of service, Mr. Speaker. We also have the rural and remote recruitment incentive, Mr. Speaker, $50,000 over 3 years, Mr. Speaker. These are just some of the incentives that we're offering. We continue to have these conversations with our rural partners, and we're proud, Mr. Speaker, of the successes that we've been having. Thank you.
Recognize the member from the General Stone Centre.
Mr. Speaker, this tired and out-of-touch government is failing our teachers, our schools, they're redlining our healthcare system, and they're absolutely failing to live up to their commitment to be the most open and accountable government in Saskatchewan history. Just look at the mess at the Sunrise Motel. Months after we asked specific questions, we learned that a motel that used to get $282 from the Ministry of Social Services received over $220,000 after the member from Northeast, the Sask Party MLA, got elected, Mr. Speaker. And once we got some sunlight on that Sunrise scandal, we heard from the Minister of Social Services that no other Sask Party MLAs were involved, no other hotels were involved. We then learned 2 hotels owned or invested by that member from Northeast were receiving the highest rates from the Ministry of Social Services and inflating their rates more than any other hotel in the province. Can the minister explain how so much public money has been wasted under his watch? Hear, hear.
Recognize the Minister of Social Services.
Mr. Speaker, in terms of full transparency, that's exactly what the ministry has been. The member asked for extensive information, and that was provided earlier this year, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we work very hard to house clients who are having challenges in emergency situations, those on income assistance, but those on child and family as well, Mr. Speaker. The amount of hotels that have been willing to work with those clients, particularly in Regina, has decreased, unfortunately, with the challenges and with the hard to house individuals, Mr. Speaker. So, as a result of these questions, we've made some changes. The ministry's made some changes in terms of procurement. There's going to be an RFP process to get a block of rooms in Regina and Saskatoon with damage deposits to see if we can get a better deal for the taxpayers, Mr. Speaker, and also ensuring there's quotes and the lowest bid comes forward in a nightly basis, Mr. Speaker. So that's some of the work we're going to do. We're going to continue to work with the auditor. But, Mr. Speaker, we're going to look after vulnerable people in this province.
Hear, hear. Hear, hear.